In the 11th year of Genesis, a catastrophic disaster struck Earth, reducing the population to 1/3. Shadow angels with wings appeared, capturing humans to extract an ecological energy known as prana. Fortunately, humanity discovered 3 advanced fighters in the ruins. If 3 pilots can unify in body and soul, they can form the mechanical angel that once cornered the shadow angels. However, finding 3 resonant individuals is incredibly challenging, as only those in perfect harmony can maximize their combat potential. Meanwhile, Sylvia has failed numerous times, but Sirius, Glenn, and Reika have a good synchronization rate. Therefore, the organization decided that these 3 would initially engage in combat. At the same time, the prophet Rena sensed that the reincarnation of the powerful killing angel, Solar Wing, was awakening. On the other side, children living in a snowy world were sneaking into a warehouse to steal items. Apollo, using his keen sense of smell, located the food section, but the noise alerted a robotic dog. Apollo and Baron chose to cover their retreat, flawlessly coordinating to disable the mechanical guard and escaping through a skylight. However, they were unaware that Sylvia and Pierre from the Deva organization were watching them. A detector showed that Apollo emitted energy in a high-dimensional quantum pattern. Sylvia, however, did not believe Apollo was their target. Her deep-seated resistance stemmed from being the reincarnation of Celiane, Solar Wing's lover from 12,000 years ago, now in love with her own brother, whom she firmly believed to be Solar Wing's reincarnation. This could easily be verified by checking for a wing mark on his back. Therefore, Sylvia and Pierre emerged directly in front of Apollo by jumping out of a sewer. Sensing danger, Apollo prepared to attack and charged at Sylvia but redirected to Pierre, who dodged with a sidestep. Apollo turned and attacked again, but Pierre repelled him with a flame kick. As Sylvia charged straight at Apollo, he instinctively counterattacked, but she not only neutralized his attack but also punched through a wall behind him. Apollo leaped onto a metal rack to slow the pace, mockingly calling Sylvia a violent woman. Unbeknownst to him, Sylvia also possessed telekinesis and used it to unscrew bolts. As Apollo landed, Sylvia knocked him out. Seeing his brother hurt, Baron prepared to help, but Pierre blocked him, preventing any intervention. Under his watch, they lifted Apollo's shirt to check his back, finding no wing mark, indicating Rena was mistaken. Sylvia wanted to further chastise him for wasting their time, but before she could act, the sky suddenly darkened, accompanied by the hypnotic song of the Shadow Angels. The barrier around was continuously being breached, and the city's humans were being controlled, moving like zombies in one direction. Sylvia and Pierre were distracted by their surroundings and didn't notice that Apollo actually seemed to have wings. Seeing Baron mesmerized by the song, Apollo struggled desperately to stand. Pierre then realized that Apollo was deploying a quantum barrier to protect himself from the song's influence, indicating he might possess the same ability to control the mechanical angel, whether or not he was the reincarnation of Solar Wing. During their conversation, Apollo bit Sylvia's leg, freed himself, and chased after Baron. He exerted all his strength to pull Baron out of the wall, only to be shocked by the sight of wires connected to Baron's body. Before Apollo could react, Baron dragged him into the wall, and a strong electric current surged through Apollo. Elsewhere, the Shadow Angel's Toma was in a deep slumber, also seeking the reincarnation of Solar Wing to awaken permanently with his power. Just as they were about to succeed, Sylvia and Pierre grabbed Apollo's hands and pulled him out, but now he too was connected to wires. At this moment, the Shadow Angel's harvest beasts released tendrils that entangled the two. Just in time, Sirius and his teammates arrived, piloting their fighters and easily defeating the regular soldiers. However, celebrating mid-battle is ill-advised. Just as Reika felt secure, she suddenly experienced chest pain. Subsequently, a dimensional gate opened in the sky, and cherubim emerged from it. Detecting a high-dimensional quantum level, the deputy commander of Deva urgently called Sirius to initiate a fusion.
Go! Aquarium!
Seeing her brother and Reika merge, Sylvia felt a surge of jealousy. At that moment, cherubim sensed the enemy's presence and fired a laser at Luna Archangel. Glenn maneuvered the legs to dodge, while Reika controlled the hands to shoot shurikens. They approached cherubim for close combat, but unexpectedly, cherubim could also emit lasers at close range. Luna Archangel was forced to retreat, but they had a trump card. Reika concentrated all her energy and released the Dragon Thunder Punch, which, despite its name, was actually delivered with a kick. Due to Cherubim's oversight, it was swiftly defeated. The deputy commander was pleased that his chosen team had won their first victory, but a mysterious man suddenly appeared, mocking him. The scientist Sophia recognized the man as Commander Fudu, the original discoverer of the mechanical angels. Fudu remarked that even when three pilots merge, they can be broken by a stronger force. Just then, the Shadow Angels used Apollo to release a powerful beam. The trio narrowly escaped a fatal blow but were hit with a terrifying psychic attack. Luna Archangel was thus dismantled. Apollo, seeing Baron pulled back, erupted with greater power, lifting an entire building. Reika, mentally broken, could no longer fight, and Sylvia took over the Luna fighter, flying towards Cherubim to rescue the struggling Apollo. Under Apollo's cries, the Soul Fighter autonomously took off without its pilot. Command detected rising energy levels, but couldn't understand why the Soul Fighter would activate on its own. In fact, Apollo's powers had awakened. He forcefully broke free and fell into the cockpit from the air. Confused, he heard a voice instructing him to shout, "Genesis Aquarian." It turned out that Apollo was indeed the reincarnation of Solar Wing, and Commander Fudu, who had disappeared for 12,000 years, was waiting for this moment. After 12,000 years of dormancy, the Shadow Angels awoke due to human destruction that left Earth in a deplorable state. They began capturing humans to extract energy, but the reincarnation of Solar Wing proved to be their greatest obstacle. Now, fully awake, Toma once again challenged humanity. Unbeknownst to them, their most feared, Apollo, had been captured and brought back to the human base. Despite the evident facts, doubts about Apollo's identity persisted. Apollo, wild and unruly, only responded to force, briefly subdued before being imprisoned. The leaders were shocked. How could Solar Wing be a savage? Yet, the mechanical angel's choice of him as Solar Wing was proof enough. Only Rena saw through his nature. No one is born savage. Apollo acted this way merely to survive. Meanwhile, Sylvia and Sirius were still lost in the thrill of their fusion. However, Sirius was actually reminiscing about his connection with Reika, as his fusion with Apollo felt only wild and violent. But before he could fully grasp this, alarms sounded throughout the base. Shadow Angel's harvest beasts were detected capturing humans on Earth, and they needed to intervene immediately. With Glenn still unconscious, Reika temporarily piloted the Soul Fighter, Sirius the Mars, and Sylvia the Luna. But during the fusion, Reika recalled her previous terror, causing a psychological breakdown, while Apollo also suffered excruciating resonance headaches. Rena calmed him with a kiss, unexpectedly awakening Apollo's wings. The backlash caused the fusion to fail, and they had to switch Reika with Pierre through teleportation. But before they could act, Apollo, or rather, the awakened Solar Wing, burst in. He called Sylvia Celian, transforming her demeanor. Apollo then blasted Pierre away and entered the teleportation device to swap places with Reika. Sirius internally resisted, but to his surprise, Apollo managed to forcibly initiate the fusion. This time, it wasn't Apollo controlling the mechanical angel, but the true Solar Wing. His punch pierced through space, and even Shadow Angel's Toma saw his radiance. Toma sent his soul to the battlefield to meet with Apollo. Apollo felt something vanish from Cherubim. The next second, Cherubim transformed and stood up. The trio felt their opponent grow stronger. The command center also detected that Cherubim's high-dimensional quantum level had increased tenfold. With just a light punch from Cherubim, it felt like the weight of a planet pressed down on the mechanical angel. Then, Cherubim began to spin, knocking the mechanical angel to the ground. It wasn't that Apollo was weak, but rather, they lacked resonance, causing the mechanical angel to move uncoordinatedly. But there was no time to adapt. Cherubim created a tornado that swept the mechanical angel into space. Toma felt disappointed. The reunion after 12,000 years lacked the original spark. Solar Wing should not be at this level. In anger, Toma slammed the mechanical angel back into Earth. Sirius was completely dumbfounded. This experience was more than just coercion. It felt like his soul was being sucked into endless darkness. Apollo was also enveloped in darkness, and even the mechanical angel was eroded by it. Sophia realized that it was Apollo's soul colliding with a deep consciousness barrier. In the clash with Toma's soul, Solar Wing's power began to spiral out of control. He is the reincarnation of the most powerful killing angel, capable of blasting people away with just a glance. As the head of the Archangels, he can easily annihilate Shadow Angel's warriors. However, he accidentally destroyed a city because he couldn't control his powers. Consequently, the human authorities decided to send him to a training camp for recruits to undergo training alongside newcomers. Apollo, however, was eager to pilot a fighter and save his friend Baron. His arrogant attitude annoyed Sylvia, who decided to teach him a lesson. But Apollo was not fooled by the same tactics again, and swiftly moved in front of Sylvia, lifting her up. Seeing this, Sirius pointed his sword at Apollo, but Apollo was unfazed. He was there to pilot the mechanical angel, having successfully done so twice before, and saw no need to waste time on training. Yet, his destruction of a city indicated his lack of adaptability, necessitating professional training before he could fight again. The task of training him fell to Sylvia, his lover from a past life. Sylvia was resistant, convinced Apollo was not Solar Wing, but if Apollo failed to master the fighter, she would also be punished. Reluctantly, she agreed to train him. The other two reserve pilots were trained by Reika and Sirius. However, their initial attempts at control were clumsy, involving multiple collisions, and Apollo nearly crashed. Sylvia was frustrated enough to want to push him out and take control herself. The deputy commander even considered demoting them to the second team. At that moment, Sophia noticed a sharp increase in the energy of the soul fighter. Though Apollo and Sylvia's minds were chaotic, their souls began to resonate. The Mars and Luna fighters seemed to flip a switch in response. Unexpectedly, Apollo accidentally kissed Sylvia. The surge in dopamine and the spike in adrenaline made the other fighter pilots also feel exhilarated, almost breaking out of the training pod. After this lesson, Apollo began to reflect on what adaptability truly meant for controlling a fighter. In previous battles, he had seen a man with wings and had subconsciously controlled the mechanical angel. Sophia began to guide him, asking what he was thinking at the time. Apollo had only one thought: to save Baron. Baron was the first person to speak to him in the shelter and had shared his food with Apollo when he was close to starving. The name Apollo was given by Baron. Sophia explained that this was the answer. His feelings for Baron had driven the mechanical angel during combat. However, before Apollo could fully comprehend this, an emergency assembly alarm sounded throughout the base. Harvest beasts had appeared in the third city. Although Apollo was not scheduled to fight, he used his sense of smell to locate Sylvia and sneaked into the soul fighter. It was only at departure that everyone realized he was on board. The commander did not plan to stop them and let Apollo join the battle. Reika used her perception to find the weak points of the harvest beasts. At the same time, her Luna fighter was bombarded by artillery. Pierre swapped places with her just in time, steering the fighter away from a fatal blow. However, Sylvia was suddenly struck by a laser, disrupting the formation. Unexpectedly, Apollo stepped forward, seemingly having an epiphany. The base detected that their fusion index had reached 98%, but this time, Sirius acted as the head in the fusion, marking the first appearance of the Mars mechanical angel. Meanwhile, the harvest beasts had finished capturing humans and were preparing to retreat. Sirius piloted the Archangel in pursuit, drawing the flaming divine sword from his chest to attack Cherubim. Cherubim immediately fired countless bombs, but the Archangel easily dodged them and descended from the sky to destroy two Cherubims. Now, only the retreating harvest beasts remained. The Archangel then penetrated the harvest beasts, and just when they thought they had won, the previously defeated Cherubim stood up again, holding the harvest beasts and charging into the space portal. He belongs to the most powerful race in the universe, yet he must beg to survive. He and Baron depend on each other for life. The name Apollo was given by Baron, who is like the sun in his heart. But now, Baron has been captured by the Shadow Angels. At any cost, Apollo is determined to rescue his dear friend. Unbeknownst to him, This is exactly what the Shadow Angels intend. To regain control of an Earth tainted by humans, they need to reclaim Solar Wing. They plan to use his power to evolve the Tree of Life and create a new world. Apollo is unaware that he is the ultimate target of the Shadow Angels. Meanwhile, he is training with the reserve pilots. The commander asks them to remove their shoes. Feeling rebellious, Apollo thinks of ambushing the commander but is thwarted by Fudu, who sends him flying with a powerful gust of wind and incidentally removes his shoes. Due to not washing his feet for 10 years, his shoes are incredibly smelly. While everyone is joking around, no one notices something unusual about Rena. To her, Fudu shines like the sun. Learning from Apollo's example, everyone willingly removes their shoes. Observing their feet, Fudu points out everyone's shortcomings and seems to see through their psychology. Could this be the legendary ability to read fortunes from feet? Reika even faints from shock. Only Sirius is confident that he performed flawlessly, not realizing that to Fudo, this appears particularly childish. Everyone is disheartened, except for Apollo, who is spirited and crawls at Fudu's feet, looking for an opportunity. To Rena, this scene appears quite different. Once again, Apollo became the butt of everyone's jokes. They didn't realize that he was the one who gained the most. He wondered why so much could be discerned through feet, a curiosity shared with Sylvia. Both headed to the playground, only to find Rena waiting for them. During training, she had noticed that everyone's energy was like a faint light in front of Fudu, who was like a pillar of light connecting heaven and earth. Rena had figured out the reason, but before she could share it, Cherubim attacked again. This time, Apollo, Sylvia, and Pierre were the ones to respond, with Pierre as the head forming the Mars Archangel. Excited, Pierre kicked out a fireball, but Cherubim easily deflected it. Pierre was stunned, and before he could recover, was blown away by a sudden burst of energy. Cherubim didn't give him a chance to get back up. The base personnel discovered that this Cherubim had a special ability. When its staff touched the ground, gravity would disappear for a few seconds. This was particularly disadvantageous for Pierre, who excelled in leg-based combat. The most stable among the mechanical angel's 3 forms was the Soul Archangel. Thus, they switched forms on the spot, with Apollo as the head. The moment he landed, he adopted a prone position on the ground. Everyone was stunned. Apollo was like a wild beast, but this still didn't work. Without gravity, he also couldn't move flexibly. Pierre thought of a solution. He controlled the legs to provide propulsion, so the Soul Archangel crawled towards Cherubim. At the last moment before getting close, he was repelled. Suddenly, the commander burst into laughter. Everything was going according to his plan. He encouraged everyone to think about how a baby learns to walk. The Soul Archangel, controlled by Apollo, was like a baby falling and getting up again and again until it could walk successfully. Indeed, Apollo had an epiphany. He asked everyone to take off their shoes, allowing the Archangel's feet to contain people's intentions. The commander timely provided guidance, suggesting they imagine that they were not actually stepping on the ground during training. Only by understanding the true nature could they become a pillar of light connecting heaven and earth. It turned out that the range of gravity's disappearance was only at the surface. As long as they could connect to the core of the earth, Cherubim's power would be neutralized. With this, Apollo learned a new skill. Apollo was awakened by a nightmare and then disappeared from the dormitory. Thus, today's training for the reserve pilots is to find Apollo in the underground maze. This place is filled with traps, and any carelessness could be fatal. Sirius and Reika can sense directions with their abilities, but Reika has a special constitution that always brings misfortune around her. Sirius not only accepts her, but also offers to share half of her misfortune. He has always known about Reika's unlucky nature and has wanted a chance to be alone with her. At this time, Sylvia does not know that her favorite brother has someone he cares about. She ventures deep into the maze alone and unexpectedly meets Pierre. Pierre decides to join her, considering that Sylvia and Apollo were lovers in a past life. Perhaps fate would bring them together. Indeed, fate is inexplicable. Apollo was hiding right above them and was caught when his stomach growled. Unexpectedly, there was a trap in the area. Just as Pierre was about to rush forward, the path ahead began to collapse. Since they couldn't capture Apollo up close, they resorted to a long-range attack. Pierre immediately shot a small fireball. Although there was a violent explosion, Pierre did not believe that Apollo had been hit. Indeed, by the time Pierre used the blast from the fireball to jump up, Apollo had already disappeared. Apollo had reached a deeper room filled with even more deadly traps. However, when Sylvia and her group arrived, they still could not find Apollo. It turned out he had already made it to the fighter jet hangar where Fudo was waiting. Fudo did not stop Apollo but instead stepped aside to let him pilot the jet, testing how far he could go alone. As he took off, the 4 others quickly followed. Reika fell into a trap, and Sirius, trying to save her, couldn't keep up, allowing Pierre and Sylvia to reach the fighter jet. Apollo was driven by a desire to save his friend and had no specific direction. When in a hurry, one can act like a headless fly, aimlessly buzzing around. Just then, the harvest beasts appeared again in the human city. Apollo could still prioritize under pressure. He turned around and headed towards the city below, unleashing his anger on the harvest beasts. Apollo's unilateral actions completely disrupted the original formation and even failed to meet the fusion index requirements. If they continued this way, they would be completely defeated. Seizing the opportunity, Cherubim emerged from the ground and launched tracking missiles directly at Apollo's soul fighter. Just at the critical moment, Sylvia, piloting the Mercury fighter, took all the damage for him. But as Sylvia was adjusting, Cherubim reached out from the ground and dragged her down. This scene reminded Apollo of when Baron was captured. Anger clouded his judgment, but what he really needed was to remain calm. Pierre recalled experiences from the sports field, recognizing that living in this era meant carrying the grief of lost loved ones. To overcome regret and loss, one must become strong and keep fighting. These thoughts made Apollo realize that saving Baron was a long-term battle. Once his emotions stabilized, his higher dimensional quantum level began to rise, even triggering new bonds. This was the true fusion the commander spoke of. Yet again, Pierre's head formed the Mars Archangel. He placed his palm on the ground to search for Cherubim's hiding spot. However, this move nearly depleted Pierre's energy, pushing his physical limits. The harvest beasts were about to pass through the dimensional gate. The trio immediately switched forms to become the Soul Archangel. Just then, a strange cherubim delayed them for a few seconds. Apollo was left outside the barrier, and once again, they let the harvest beasts escape. The Soul Archangel mastered a new skill called Infinity Punch, which can extend infinitely from Earth to the Moon and even turn during its release. It's like a mechanical version of Luffy. With this technique, Apollo finally gained the power to truly compete against Cherubim. Just recently, the commander conducted a new training session for everyone, instructing them to make someone a kilometer away turn their head using just their imagination. This was also a way to enhance their attack power, not only using their minds but also impacting the opponent's soul. However, to the reserve pilots, achieving this from such a distance seemed impossible. Fudo demonstrated it for them, and a falcon from high above directly landed on his arm. Seeing this, Apollo was eager to try, but when it came to the actual attempt, the distance was simply too far. Neither Sylvia nor Sirius could reach the target. Apollo had the most promise due to his astonishingly large energy range, but the issue was his lack of control. Thus, the first group was completely unsuccessful. Sophia, worried they would lose confidence, wanted to shorten the distance, but the commander offered a philosophical perspective. There is no such thing as distance in the world. It is the thought of distance that makes things seem far. Distance and time become illusory with people's hesitation. They had to continue training at this distance if they wanted to grasp the essence. Sirius always felt he was just one step away. So, late at night, Sirius invited Reika to the small woods, hoping she would always be his partner. This was his way of confessing his feelings to Reika. However, Sylvia, who was eavesdropping, was distraught. She then tried to disrupt the two during their training. Unbeknownst to her, Apollo was also secretly watching from above. As Sirius hit Reika, Sylvia's energy accidentally struck Apollo. Before they could react, harvest beasts descended on the other side of Earth, capturing humans. Ordinary weapons were ineffective, not even delaying them. Only the mechanical angels could combat them, so Apollo and the others immediately set off. This time, Sirius took the lead as the head, and the trio merged into Mars Archangel, brandishing a long sword and charging at Cherubim. This was their 6th encounter, and Cherubim was already accustomed to his moves, dodging them with ease. However, Sirius's recent attempt had been successful, so he used telekinesis to launch a light sword at Cherubim, but he fell short, and Cherubim compressed the energy and sent it back. Reika's face was filled with concern. She hoped Sirius would receive her feelings. Sirius understood her and decided it was time for Sylvia to take the lead as the head. As Luna Archangel, an archer, she could shoot his arrow of the heart, reaching any distance. Thus, Luna Archangel made its debut. In the final moment, before the attack hit Cherubim, Toma took over control of its body. At the commander's command, the trio transformed into Soul Archangel. Apollo felt the power of Sylvia and Sirius. His energy had been several times stronger than the others from the start, just lacking some control. But with their assistance, this power was harnessed. He channeled Luffy, unleashing the deadly Infinity Punch. Cherubim dodged again by moving sideways, and then the Archangel's arm surprisingly turned mid-course. However, the attack did not cause any damage. Sophia was puzzled. Although the attack was delivered, it failed. The commander explained that only their intentions had reached, which could not physically hit the target. Suddenly, Sirius had a key idea. He instructed Apollo to strike at the edge of the sky with all his strength. Although Apollo did not understand, he still gathered all his power and punched towards space beyond Earth. This man, holding a rose, pressed its thorn deep into his palm, reveling in the pleasure from the pain. He called this bizarre act performance art, claiming only the cultured could appreciate its beauty. Unexpectedly, he found like-minded individuals. After Sirius left, Toma and Otoha teleported there. Toma sincerely praised Sirius, marveling that a human could understand the beauty of destruction. Yet, knowing too much could also bring misfortune. Meanwhile, Sylvia was researching in the library. Since she favored her brother, she was unfriendly toward Reika, which backfired. She wanted to borrow a book, but Reika said it was confidential. However, she secretly handed it over to Sirius. Sylvia, who was eavesdropping, was infuriated, feeling targeted by them. Apollo couldn't stand it anymore and burst out to argue loudly with Sirius. Nevertheless, Sylvia still supported her brother, firmly believing that he was the true solar wing, as her memories of a past life remained vivid. However, Sirius did not believe in destiny. He thought neither he nor Apollo were the reincarnations of Solar Wing. Before they could settle their debate, the command center discovered that 4 cities had been destroyed, an unprecedented series of destructions. The Shadow Angels must have had a larger plan. The deputy commander predicted their next target, but Sirius found this unreliable. He believed their real target was Memphis, based on the pattern of the previous 4 cities. He speculated that the enemy might be creating a perfect pentagon, thinking this shape was beautiful and only the cultured could understand its meaning. This led to an intense argument, with both insisting their prediction was correct. Just then, Memphis detected the presence of cherubim, proving Sirius was right. They immediately set off, and above the city, a purple pentagon slowly formed. Then, an unseen cherubim emerged from its center. As everyone stared at its light, they felt as though they were brainwashed, inexplicably finding the light beautiful. Yet, Sirius was reminded of painful memories. As a royal, he was burdened with high expectations from childhood. His parents believed he was the reincarnation of Solar Wing, but he never showed any signs of wings or memories from a past life. However, his sister Sylvia could vaguely recall fragments of a past life, plunging him into darkness. Sylvia became obsessed, seeing her brother moving away and unable to catch up, filled with hatred and jealousy. Apollo was ridiculed as a stray dog, mocked for his impossible mission to save Baron. All 3 were nearing a mental breakdown, a result of Cherubim's new ability to subdue the wingless with its beauty, revealing their inner ugliness. The human base immediately switched to a photonic camera and discovered that this cherubim was a dodecahedron, confirmed only with the naked eye. This was a deception of perception, and only by seeing through the ugliness behind the beauty could they find a solution. However, at this moment, the 3 were filled with negative energy, all vying for control of the Archangel. Even if they successfully merged, this would only amplify the negative energy, feeding the cherubim. The commander stated that if they were defeated in this way, it only showed their level and humanity deserved extinction. He forced them to merge, but Sirius made the first move, drawing his sword and stabbing towards Apollo's cockpit. Apollo and Sirius's powers clashed, creating a destabilizing energy in the Archangel. This would inevitably lead to self-destruction, which was exactly what Toma wanted to see. Suddenly, Reika remembered a bond unique to her and Sirius. and shot an arrow of the heart at Sirius. Sirius instantly regained his clarity, realizing the ugliness hidden behind the beauty. It turned out this was also the commander's intention. When someone falls in love, they desire to possess that person, but jealousy arises when they realize they cannot own them. Jealousy is also a form of energy. Transforming this energy into a driving force elevates the soul. At this moment, Sirius had such an epiphany. Using the jealousy of Apollo and Sylvia, he created a powerful tornado that approached Cherubim. With the disappearance of Cherubim, Apollo and Sylvia also regained their clarity. Among all the reserve pilots, only June and Tsugumi had not yet merged. Tsugumi was curious about what merging actually felt like. June reminded her that merging meant fighting, which could be deadly. Despite this, Tsugumi still wanted to try it out. So, at midnight, the two prepared to quietly experience it. However, they were discovered by Rika and Pierre, who were experienced in merging. They briefly explained the sensation, emphasizing that acting recklessly wouldn't work, the importance of setting the right atmosphere, and considering the partner's thoughts, though mere compliance wasn't enough. Hearing about the method 1,000 times was not as good as practical experience. Reika decided to guide them firsthand. Tsugumi felt her heart race, as if something was breaking through, and June felt a force piercing his brain. However, this was just a simulation, and vastly different from actual combat. Just then, a new type of cherubim appeared, and the base immediately went into combat readiness. Surprisingly, the pilots sent out were Apollo, June, and Tsugumi. It seemed the commander was aware of their intentions. But when faced with the real situation, Tsugumi became confused and felt inadequate, so Pierre took her place. They transformed into Soul Archangel and launched the powerful move, Infinity Punch, right away, only to be repelled by Cherubim. Pierre tried to increase the burning power, so Apollo switched to Flame Punch, but it still had no effect. Not only that, but Cherubim also released flames that disintegrated the Archangel. Pierre was critically injured, and the command center quickly arranged for Reika to replace him. It was a crisis at his first battle. June became panicked as Cherubim locked onto his fighter. Reika, just entering the scene, took the hit for him. Although they were not seriously harmed, the three could no longer resonate, and continuing the fight would lead to total defeat. At that moment, June felt as if his heart was going to explode. He remembered the sensation from the simulation and realized that to merge again, they needed to swap in Tsugumi. At this point, avoiding the problem would solve nothing. Tsugumi regained her courage, rushed into the transfer pod, and switched places with Reika. Tsugumi had to join because her excitement could trigger a penetrating power. Given Cherubim's toughness, external damage was nearly impossible. Only Tsugumi could break through internally. Encouraged by June, the three merged again into Luna Archangel. Apollo controlled the legs, charging at Cherubim. After dodging an attack, they tackled it down. June took the opportunity to use telekinesis to see inside Cherubim's structure. This was the most tragic disaster in human history. All children under the age of 13 lost consciousness while sleeping. Headquarters suspected it was a mental attack by the Shadow Angels. However, the commander calmly stated that the gateway to dreams had been opened and targeted training was needed for everyone. Both boys and girls were called to sleep together in the hall. This situation pleased some and distressed others. If one person passed gas, everyone suffered. No one could sleep peacefully. Yet, once someone actually fell asleep, they immediately entered dreamland because it was indeed the Shadow Angel's doing. Cherubim Titania could enter the gate of dreams through the moonlight, absorbing pure energy. Sleep is a human instinct, making this problem seemingly unsolvable. Most importantly, humans could not locate Titania, as the path connecting reality and dreams is ethereal. All the reserve pilots entered dreamland, but the commander remained calm, blaming it on the moon. The moon we see is only the part illuminated by the sun. The unlit part hides the moon's true nature. Much like dreams. Dreams can be mesmerizing because they fulfill all beautiful fantasies, but the intentions behind these fantasies may not always be benign. Just like Apollo, who always longed for a family, so he dreamt of a so-called mother, but his sense of smell told him this mother was fake. Others were not so lucky. Most were still trapped in their dreams. and only 5 people eventually woke up. According to their descriptions, the moon appeared in all their dreams. To save those still asleep, Apollo decided to sleep again. The smell he detected earlier must have been cherubim. Only by re-entering dreamland could he locate it. To be cautious, the 3 decided to sleep inside their fighter jets this time. Apollo quickly fell asleep and found himself in a graveyard. The woman he had encountered before appeared again, ready to make humans fight each other. She summoned Sirius from the dream, who attacked Apollo upon seeing him. Thinking he wouldn't get hurt in the dream, Apollo fought back seriously. However, the injuries Sirius received in the dream reflected on his physical body in reality. If it continued, Sirius would die. Sylvia called out loudly from outside. Apollo really heard her voice but became hesitant. Facing the incoming attack, he had to catch the blade with his bare hands. Unexpectedly, his flowing blood activated the soul fighter, breaking through the barrier between reality and dreams. Pierre and Chloe also woke up because of this. Following Apollo's lead, they called their own fighter jets in the dream. Surprisingly, a high-energy reaction was detected outside. The commander seemed to have anticipated something like this, indicating that the resonating mechanical angels were pulled into the dream. However, they still faced a challenge. Cherubim dominated the dreamscape. Even with their fighter jets, what could they do? Not only was the Infinity Punch ineffective, but cherubim could also corrode the Archangel's body, causing immense pain to the trio. Fortunately, Sirius had regained consciousness. He alerted Sylvia from his dream that the truth was hidden behind the moon, though it was unclear if she understood. She headbutted the machine, knocking herself unconscious to enter the dream and switch places with Chloe. Sylvia directed Apollo and Pierre, and they transformed into Luna Archangel. They then broke the ground with their limbs, which surprisingly turned into a lake surface. Seeing this, Sylvia quickly formed a bow of light and shot an arrow at the moon's reflection in the water below. This arrow pierced through the dream and reality, completely destroying cherubim. All the sleeping children woke up. However, a long time passed, and the Archangel and the 3 pilots were still wandering in the dream. Sophia and Rena worried they might not return, but such a problem was trivial for the commander. He teased Apollo like one would tease a dog, bringing out a bowl of fragrant steamed rice. This was the Archangel's toughest battle yet. Cherubim's playful attacks left them battered, striking without the chance to retaliate, and even dispersing their merged form with a single punch. The once invincible divine weapon was now easily defeated because this time, Cherubim was piloted by Shadow Angel's drivers whose aim was to reclaim Apollo. 12,000 years ago, due to a betrayal, the solar wing caused an angel to lose its life. Now, as the ceremonial fire was about to extinguish and following several defeats, the Shadow Angels realized they couldn't let Toma face the solar wing alone. Thus, they had their grand inventor create a new type of cherubim, combining it with Moroha's power to ensure they regained the solar wing. Unaware of being targeted, Apollo was dueling with Sirius in swordplay. Everyone thought he had no chance of winning. However, Apollo's wild instincts made him unpredictable to Sirius, an elegant swordsman who adhered to idealistic methods, exposing his weaknesses. In a swift move, Apollo threw his wooden sword and leaped at Sirius before he could react, biting his hair and causing him to fall. Sirius claimed it was a foul, but in real battle, there are no rules. Victory is the only goal. While they were at a stalemate, Cherubim attacked again. Apollo, Sylvia, and Pierre went to confront it. Data indicated this enemy was unlike any they had faced before. They planned to merge into Luna Archangel for long-distance reconnaissance, but Apollo insisted on leading as the head, rushing forward. Amid their argument, Cherubim targeted Sylvia, hitting her fighter jet. Forced to merge into Soul Archangel, they were unprepared when Cherubim knocked them out with a single move. Command suggested switching modes, but Apollo persisted, proving as powerless as a child against an adult. At that moment, Reika suddenly sensed a very ominous feeling. June, based on the energy reaction, speculated that a Shadow Angel was aboard. Indeed, as he predicted, this cherubim was controlled by Moroha. It targeted Sylvia at the back and quickly maneuvered behind to knock down the Archangel. Apollo's wild instincts were triggered, and he crawled on all fours towards Cherubim. Unexpectedly, Cherubim duplicated itself, jumped up in the air, and then dove down together, striking the Archangel's back heavily again, causing it to split into 3 separate fighter jets. As Cherubim prepared to pursue its advantage, it suddenly vanished, inexplicably. It turned out the newly developed cherubim by the Shadow Angels was unstable and couldn't withstand Moroha's power. Moroha felt somewhat disappointed. If the solar wing was only of this caliber, even if obtained, it would be useless. However, the wings were their glory, and he could not allow them to become wingless. Once the cherubim was repaired, he planned to return to Earth. On the other side, Sylvia suffered severe internal injuries and needed time to recover. During this period, Sirius and Apollo argued again. If Apollo had followed the command to probe the enemy's strength earlier, perhaps the subsequent brutal battle could have been avoided. After a night of reflection, Apollo caught a lizard for Sylvia, having been told by Baron that it was medicinal. However, Sirius completely rejected this idea. The two clashed violently again, and even Sylvia's awakening could not stop the drama. Initially, it seemed like Apollo was causing trouble on purpose, but this time, it was Sirius who lost his rationality first, unaware that he had changed. Before they could determine a winner, a portal suddenly opened in the sky, and cherubim attacked again. Sirius piloted the Luna fighter to the front, and they merged into Luna Archangel. As soon as they landed, they fired an arrow, but cherubim split in two to dodge the attack. Under Pierre's shocked gaze, the two cherubims quickly approached and began to pummel the Archangel. The best decision now would be to switch forms, but Sirius was beyond reason, not even noticing Sylvia being drawn into the fight. He was obsessed with defeating cherubim himself. However, reality was harsh, and despite his intentions, the outcome was the same. He was beaten up again. Sylvia had not fully recovered, and seeing her brother in danger nearly caused her to faint from the shock. Fortunately, Apollo smelled her presence just in time as she was almost crushed. He warned Sirius to watch his step. That's when Sirius realized his recklessness had almost killed his sister. He had only been watching the sky, not where he was stepping. After calming down, he had no reason to continue as the head. Apollo then got ready for action. They recombined into Soul Archangel, and at the moment their fists clashed with cherubims. Moroha sensed Apollo's seriousness, but it was too late. He was still on the receiving end of the punches. Apollo was resilient, like a cockroach that couldn't be beaten. And importantly, he had his comrades. At that moment, he and Sirius locked eyes, as if a switch had been flipped. Simultaneously, they punched towards each other, but in reality, this was a new move they had just mastered. A group of students was on a bus going for a spring outing when they passed by a lake. Suddenly, a fierce wind arose, causing the bus to lose control. Immediately afterward, the lake water surged and engulfed the bus. Elsewhere, Reika drew the Parting of Fate tarot card, which left her listless and preoccupied. At that moment, a sudden downpour began, and a black cat dashed out, seemingly portending misfortune. The commander appeared before her, claiming the rain symbolized good luck, but Reika felt uneasy. After returning to her room, someone had managed to find a projector. As the senior, Reika was given the pleasure of turning it on. Unexpectedly, however, when she pressed the power button, and a horrifying scene appeared on the screen. A group of children reaching out their hands in agony. Tsugumi, overwhelmed by emotions, used her powers to explode the projector. Reika blamed herself, believing her misfortune had caused everything. She left a note and prepared to leave alone. Apollo noticed her behavior. Recently, his nose had been blocked, and he couldn't smell food. But oddly, he could detect Reika's scent. She explained it was the scent of misfortune, which is why she needed to leave. Although it was hard, she believed her presence would cause her friends to disappear one by one, and she couldn't bear the pain of losing another friend, like she had lost Glenn. Her departure caused chaos at the base, because cherubim had appeared again, and she was supposed to fight but was nowhere to be found. Apollo had to replace her. Coincidentally, Reika was passing by the reactive lake when the train unexpectedly stopped. She felt a strong sense of foreboding, and quickly got off to check. Just then, Apollo and two others flew right above her, leaving Reika stunned. Meanwhile, the base detected an energy response at the bottom of the lake which had inexplicably increased fivefold in volume, suggesting that cherubim was hiding underwater. When Sirius tried to merge as the head, they unexpectedly couldn't combine. Reika felt responsible for this. The three fighters plunged into the lake. Sylvia felt increasingly cold, initially thinking it was her body reacting, but then the control systems of all the machines also malfunctioned, immobilizing them. The base's teleportation device suddenly failed. At that moment, Apollo smelled Reika's scent, but suddenly the bridge inexplicably cracked. Reika grabbed the iron frame to save her life, but waiting further seemed like surrendering to fate. Rather than passively awaiting doom, she let go, plunging into the lake in both capitulation and defiance. At that moment, the lake water underwent another strange change. Sirius was ejected from his fighter jet. June detected that energy levels were continuously increasing. Reika entered the Mars fighter jet, and then Apollo and Sylvia regained their mobility. Shortly afterward, they discovered the bus submerged at the bottom of the lake with the children inside, all still alive. Reika realized that the lake water was cherubim, which had been absorbing the children's energy, meaning they were essentially inside cherubim's stomach. Breaking through its stomach would defeat it. However, Reika's success rate for merging was very low. Could it work this time? Nevertheless, Apollo was able to counteract the misfortune, and to everyone's astonishment, they merged into an enhanced version of Mars Archangel.